Hello and welcome back to the third rail. If you follow the channel, you might have seen a new addition to the collection video I made a few weeks back, where I presented an ex-Wehrmacht shunter of the ÖBB, the Austrian Federal Railways. It was a class 2065 and it was Märklin model number 3139. Märklin produced quite a few versions of this shunter over the years, and I happen to have several examples in the collection. They don't come out often, if at all, in some cases, so I thought, wouldn't this be a good theme for a running session? My running sessions are never as simple as unboxing and rating models. The items I buy have usually spent most of their life in a drawer or on a shelf, and have not seen much action. As a result, they never run properly out of the box and always require some form of maintenance. I usually inspect my models when they arrive, make note of maintenance needs, and store them as is until they are needed. Only then do I service them, and this can be a few years later sometimes. Today's shunters are a good example of this. I have never used most of them, and some have spent the last 3 or 4 years in my drawers. The most usual things to expect with engines that have been standing for a long time are resinification of oil and greases and dried rubber tires. So, let's see what my shunters have in store for us. We'll start with the most recent acquisition, the little 3139. I already know from the last video that it needs new traction tires, that it is noisy, and that the ground connection is a bit weak. So I'll start with the service. We'll need to lift the body first on the shunter. The body screw is hidden under a flap that simply lifts off. There we go. We then need to loosen the screw. This will free the body and we can lift it. This reveals the chassis, which is a typical Märklin arrangement with a little mechanical reverser and a 3-pole motor at the back. I'll start by inspecting the motor. I'll take the motor plate out. The brushes are as new, that's good, and the armature is absolutely fine. All it needs is a quick wipe. The model has definitely not seen much track by the looks of it. That's good. Now, let's check the gears. They are fine too, but they're a bit on the sluggish side. I can feel a bit of resistance if I try to move them by hand. All we need here is a little drop of oil here and there. One tiny drop on each gear and one on each axle bearing. There we go. Everything's moving much smoother now. I can now reassemble the motor. Now onto the traction tires. I'll first need to loosen the rods. I'll use the medium-sized hex nut driver from the Märklin toolset to remove the screw. Then remove the old tires once I have access. I'll clean the surface of the wheels and install new traction tires. It's the type 7154 if you're interested. To reinstall the bolt or screw, I hold it in position with tweezers, turn the bolt by hand to find the thread, and once I've done this, I can use the driver to finish fastening each screw. Now we only have one thing left to do. It is to take care of the ground connection. I'll clean the remaining wheels and then I'll check what is happening under the pickup shoe. I'll remove the grease there and I'll inspect the middle axle. There should be a spring that pushes it down to help it maintain contact with the track. The spring also conducts current between the axle and the chassis. We just need to make sure that the spring is present and that it is still strong enough. And it is. The next thing is to check that the axle is clean. If it isn't, it might also need a wipe to remove old greases. There we go, all done. Then it is time for a quick function test, and it is fine. So now we can reassemble everything. Let's put the blackout card back. There we go. Now the body, the screw, and the flap. Time for a run-in. Okay, on to the next victim, with which came another classic problem. The Swedish 3138 was completely seized. This is a typical issue with engines lubricated with Märklin oil. The oil is fine to use if engines are run regularly. If they are not, the oil resinifies and locks the gears. It is often possible to free things up by carefully turning the motor armature manually. If there is no movement with gentle pressure, which was the case here, a squirt of WD-40 or another penetrating fluid should free things up. After a quick wipe and a bit of lubrication and reassembly, I had a little racer on the track. There are ways to avoid such problems. The first one is to service locomotives before putting them in long-term storage and not lubricate them during that service. This is something that I started doing on locomotives a few years back. My SNCF and FS shunters received this treatment, so all that was needed to get them ready was to change traction tires and lubricate the gears and motor armature. Now, I was doing this at the time because I was still using the Märklin oil, and I found this effective, but it's very time consuming, so I stopped after a few locomotives. I since abandoned Märklin oil and I switched to another product called Ballistol, which is a gun oil that doesn't resinify. Engines I maintain with this can withstand longer period of inactivity and can be used straight out of the box. For example, I had used the CFL Shunter about 8 months ago, see the link at the top of the screen, and I didn't need to do anything for this running session. A little Ballistol goes a long way. If you look at my bottle, I bought it 2 years ago, and it is still almost full after perhaps 40 services. Right, I only had 2 other shunters to deal with, the 3346, which is a double shunter, and 2858 Loco. Both only needed a quick service and new tires. So at that point I had spent 3 hours on maintenance, and I finally had a full contingent of locos. So all that was needed then was to unbox a few wagons, right? Well, there again, it is a bit more complicated than that in the way I do things. I'm really bizarre with my handling of my rolling stock. But I check every chassis and I make sure that the couplings are in good shape. I adjust them as necessary. There's also a little video on this on the channel, little link at the top now. Then I clean the wheels of cars I have not used before, even if they look brand new. I use a paraffin-based cleaner. In this case, it's Track Magic, but even something like smoke fluid would work too. This will avoid the arcing and sparkles in places on the track, but the main reason I do this is to make the cleaning easier later on. The paraffin will leave a thin coating that will make it more difficult for dirt and debris to stick to the wheels. It won't prevent accumulations of mucky stuff, but what will stick will be far easier to remove after a running session. And yes, I do clean the wheels of all my locomotive, coaches and wagons before putting them back in storage too. So, after 4 hours of maintenance, everything is finally ready to be enjoyed. This might sound like a lot of work, but it is the only way to ensure a safe operation in an automated setup like mine. This can be a bit tedious at times, but it is all part of the fun of owning model trains. They need to be maintained properly in order to provide a maximum enjoyment. For this running session, we'll be using the new wireless block system configuration I presented last week on the channel. So all the signals and turnout changes are transmitted wirelessly now. I have put a link to the video at the top of your screen if you're interested. I think I've spoken for long enough, so you'll find train composition information with model numbers in the video description. I'll hand over to the trains now, and I'll rejoin at the end of the video. Well, it looks like all this maintenance has paid off. Everything ran very smoothly. We've reached the end of the video now. If you've made it that far, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. This is very much appreciated. I'd also like to thank you for all the subscriptions, likes and shares you have been giving me. I found this very rewarding and this keeps me going. It also helps the channel in reaching a wider audience. Thank you very much again for this. But for now, bye and see you soon on the channel.